The American Museum of Natural History in New York City has, among its many exhibits, the Hall of Meteorites. As you might imagine, the exhibit holds meteorite specimens, over 100 of them, and these specimens tell us stories about our solar system, stories of its origin, stories of the formation of planets, and stories of when meteorites have collided with Earth. One of these collision stories is the Allende meteorite, a space rock that was observed falling to Earth in Mexico in 1969. Since its collision course, fragments of the Allende meteorite have had many ancient and important stories to tell. The calcium and aluminum deposits on the fragments are large enough to allow for testing and dating that reveal the age of the oldest rocks formed in the solar system. In the beginning, told meteorite style. It turns out the Allende meteorite also holds a piece of our story, of humanity's story, yours and mine. A fragment of the meteorite is displayed in the Hall of Meteorites alongside something else, a vial of stardust. This is dust that has been isolated from the meteorite, dust from the beginning. Pre-solar grains, as they're called, from our solar system's origins. Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Every atom of oxygen in our lungs, of carbon in our muscles, of calcium in our bones, of iron in our blood, shares something with that vial of stardust from the Allende meteorite. God created and formed us from the stardust of the heavens, and in this season of Lent, we are invited to remember. We signify that invitation today for those who choose with the imposition of ashes, with a cross of dust placed on our forehead. Remember that you are stardust, and to dust you shall return. Remember that you are claimed not by the limits of your own self-centered desires, but by the Creator of the earth and heavens. You are stardust. The cross of dust that many of us will wear is both an invitation and also a remembrance of its own, a retracing, a returning to the cross of our baptism. After being welcomed through the waters, the oil of chrism is placed on our heads, as we are told that we are sealed by the Holy Spirit in baptism and marked as Christ's own forever. Much like the calcium and aluminum deposits of the meteorite, the cross of our baptism reveals the truest story of who we are, Christ's own forever. We are stardust, beloved and holy, and we are called at our baptism into fullness of life in Jesus the Christ. The paths of our baptismal cross are the roadmap for our Lenten journey. With dust and ash, we retrace and return to the familiar lines. We follow the paths to the heart of God and to our fullest selves. Remember that you are stardust, and to dust you shall return. In our gospel lesson today, Jesus reminds us that remembering, returning again to the paths of our baptism, requires practice. While Jesus shares some words of warning about practicing our faith before others, the fact that we will practice our faith is a given. When you give alms, not if. Whenever you pray, not perhaps you should consider praying. Whenever you fast, not possibly, maybe, if the desire ever strikes you. The routine of giving, the rhythm of prayer, and the ritual of fasting are assumed. These are the paths to the heart of God and to new and contrite hearts in us. These are the practices that break our hearts open to our own stories, the ones we want to celebrate and revisit, and the ones that need the tender love and care of God to be healed. These are the practices that break our hearts open to the story of God's redemptive love in Jesus, the story for which we prepare in this season. Giving, prayer, and fasting. These practices break our hearts open to the stories of others and challenge us to explore the things that we treasure. These practices allow space for the Holy Spirit to repair and restore us so that we can follow the call of our baptism to also repair and restore. Remember that you are stardust, and to dust you shall return. In these 40 days, how is the Holy Spirit calling you to give? Where and how are you being called outside of yourself to greater service? Remember that you are stardust, and to dust you shall return. In these 40 days, how is the Holy Spirit calling you to pray? What are your laments and confessions, your intercessions and thanksgivings? Do you have a time and space set apart to dwell with God? Remember that you are stardust, and to dust you shall return. In these 40 days, from what is the Holy Spirit inviting you to fast? The practice of fasting is about so much more than giving up dessert. And now giving up dessert may be one way for you to make more space for God, and if so, practice that. But you could also fast from overscheduling, the Lenten discipline of saying, no, I'm at capacity. The calendar is full. Perhaps fasting from social media or any of the number of electronic devices that command our attention. To what rituals, routines, and rhythms are you being called? Very shortly, you will hear the invitation to a holy Lent. In your giving, praying, and fasting, how will you invite the Holy Spirit to be present and to break your heart open? And fair warning, the Holy Spirit is going to show up, formally invited or not. The Holy Spirit is the supreme party crasher in that way, especially when there's the promise of dancing amongst the stars. So in these 40 days, how will you remember that you are marked as Christ's own forever? That you are mortal, and yet also, in the fullness of life in Jesus, somehow cosmic. How will you remember that you are stardust?